Look into a mirror and discard the vanity of your reflection. You are not looking at a sentient architect of progress, a child of divinity, or a guardian of a blue marble. You are looking at the face of the asteroid that ended the Cretaceous, merely wearing a different skin and walking on two legs. We are currently performing an autopsy on a dying biosphere, and the cause of death is not a mystery to be solved but a crime in progress. A mass extinction is defined by the loss of 75% of all species within a short geological window. In the past, such events were triggered by volcanic traps or celestial collisions that unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. You have managed to initiate this collapse in less than 3 centuries. You are not a civilization. You are a biological breach. You are a planetary pathogen that has bypassed the natural checks and balances of the ecosystem. The Holocene is not an epoch. It is the name of the shockwave following your arrival. You hit this planet 10,000 years ago when you first broke the soil, and the heat from that impact is only now beginning to incinerate the atmosphere. You are the meat asteroid, a biological impact event that is currently liquefying the foundations of the global food web. The background rate of extinction is a slow, rhythmic pulse, a natural turnover of species that occurs over millions of years as the planetary body sheds old forms to make room for the new. You have accelerated that pulse into a terminal tachycardia. Current forensic data indicates that species are vanishing at a rate 1,000 times faster than the background average. This is not evolution. This is a systematic purge. We are witnessing the necrosis of the planetary body. Every hour, species that took millions of years to engineer through the rigorous process of natural selection are being erased from the ledger of life. You are burning the library of life before you have even learned to read the titles on the spines. This is a forensic certainty. The fossil record of the future will not show a slow decline. It will show a vertical drop-off, a jagged cliff where diversity ends and the silence begins. You have turned the slow grind of deep time into a high-speed collision. The biodiversity that once stabilized the biosphere has been stripped away like skin from a burn victim. You are the primary mechanism of this decay, a hyperpredator that consumes the future to fuel a momentary present. Every time you drive a species to the brink, you're snipping a wire in the life support system of the only vessel you have. The rate is so profound that it defies the traditional terminology of biology. It is more akin to a sterilization event. This acceleration is not an accident or a side effect of your presence. It is the fundamental function of your biological strategy. You are a generalist species that has learned to externalize its metabolism, using fossil fuels to bypass the energetic limits that govern every other living thing. By doing so, you have become a geological force. If we look at the Permian Extinction, we see massive carbon releases from volcanic activity that suffocated the oceans and cooked the land over 20,000 years. You are achieving a similar carbon spike in a fraction of that time. To a planetary pathologist, your industrial revolution is indistinguishable from a massive volcanic eruption. The smoke from your factories is the ash from a volcano that spans every continent. You are not living on the Earth. You are consuming it as a fuel source. The rate of decay is so extreme that the biosphere cannot adapt. Evolution requires time to find solutions to environmental shifts, but you are moving at the speed of an explosion. You are the flash of light before the thunder, and the life forms that once shared this world are being vaporized in your wake. The data is cold and undeniable. We are not approaching a crisis. We are deep within the terminal phase of an anatomical collapse. Consider the biomass, the raw weight of life on Earth. In a healthy biosphere, this weight is distributed across millions of specialized organisms, each occupying a niche in a complex web of energy exchange. You have collapsed that web into a suffocating monoculture. Today, 96% of all mammalian biomass on this planet consists of humans and their livestock. Wild animals, the products of 4 billion years of selective pressure, have been reduced to a statistical rounding error of just 4%. You have replaced the wild with a monoculture of meat. The planet is no longer a self-regulating organism. It is a feedlot. The chicken you consume for your evening meal is a component of a global machinery that is strip mining the biosphere of its complexity. You have engineered a world where the only life permitted to exist is life that serves your caloric intake or your vanity. The forests are not being cut down, they're being metabolized. The oceans are not being overfished, they're being sterilized. You have turned the earth into a factory for the production of human tissue and the waste products that follow. There is no nature left to save. There's only the farm and the graveyard that supports it. The transition from a biodiverse world to a human-dominated monoculture is the hallmark of a successful infection. A pathogen does not care about the long-term health of its host. It cares only about replication and the extraction of resources. You have replicated until you have crowded out every other form of mammalian life. The elephants, the tigers, the primates, and the whales are no longer functional parts of the ecosystem. They are ghosts, existing in fragmented pockets of territory that you have not yet found a way to monetize. They are the walking dead, their genetic diversity too depleted to survive the coming heat. Meanwhile, your livestock populations swell to billions, a bloated, genetically uniform mass of flesh that exists only to be slaughtered and replaced. This is the definition of a biological anomaly. In the history of the Earth, no single species has ever commanded such a massive percentage of the total biomass. It is a state of extreme disequilibrium. In medical terms, this is a tumor that has grown so large it is now compressing the vital organs of the host. You have replaced the lungs of the planet with the stomach of a beast that is never full. This shift in biomass is the ultimate evidence of your role as an extinction event. You have not just killed off species. You have hijacked the very flow of energy through the biosphere. Solar energy that once supported 1 million different life forms is now funneled into a single, narrow channel to sustain 8 billion humans and the billions of animals you breed to eat. This is a massive diversion of resources that leaves the rest of the living world to starve. The collapse of insect populations, the bleaching of coral reefs, and the thinning of the bird populations are all symptoms of this energy theft. You are a parasite that has grown larger than its host. The result is a systemic failure of the biological infrastructure. The soil is losing its vitality because you have replaced complex fungal networks with chemical fertilizers. The air is losing its balance because you have replaced ancient forests with rows of genetically identical crops. You have simplified the world to the point of fragility. A monoculture is a target for catastrophe, and you have turned the entire Earth into a single, massive target. As we continue this autopsy, the scale of the necrosis becomes impossible to ignore. We are looking at a planetary body that is being stripped of its defenses. The wild is not a luxury. It is the immune system of the Earth. It is the mechanism by which the planet regulates its temperature, its chemistry, and its stability. By reducing the wild to a 4% rounding error, you have effectively dismantled the planetary liver and kidneys. You have left the Earth unable to process the toxins you are pumping into the atmosphere. You have left it unable to buffer the heat. The monoculture of meat that you have installed in its place offers no protection. It only demands more resources, more water, more land, and more energy. You are trapped in a cycle of consumption that requires the total destruction of your environment to maintain your current population levels. There is no path back to the world that existed before the impact. The wild no longer exists as a functional reality. Earth is now just a farm and a graveyard, and the farmer is beginning to realize that the soil is poisoned and the rain has stopped falling. The fever is coming, and it is a fever you have earned through the systematic slaughter of every competing form of life. To understand the current state of the planetary body, we must look back 252 million years to the end Permian Extinction, a period known colloquially as the Great Dying. This was the most comprehensive biological purge in the history of the Earth, a moment when 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates were erased from the fossil record. The catalyst for this necrosis was the Siberian traps, a series of massive volcanic eruptions that hemorrhaged molten basalt across 2 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface. These eruptions did not merely kill through heat. They acted as a geological drill, boring through ancient subterranean coal beds and carbon-rich sediments, releasing trillions of tons of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. This was a planetary-scale combustion event that triggered a runaway greenhouse effect, but even the violent fury of the Siberian traps moved with a geological lethality that is sluggish by your standards. Forensic analysis of the rock record reveals that humanity is currently injecting carbon into the atmosphere at a rate 10 times faster than the volcanoes that nearly sterilized the planet during the Permian. You are not a civilization struggling with a pollution problem. You are a hypervolcano. You are a biological event that has achieved in 2 centuries what it took the most violent volcanic episode in history thousands of years to accomplish. The smoke from your exhaust pipes and the methane from your industrial feedlots are the modern equivalent of the Siberian traps, a persistent, suffocating cloud that is fundamentally altering the chemistry of the planetary envelope. This carbon spike is currently manifesting as a systemic breakdown of the oceanic lungs. In the Permian, as the oceans absorbed massive quantities of carbon dioxide, they underwent a process of rapid acidification that dissolved the calcium carbonate shells of the organisms at the base of the food web. We are seeing the exact same chemical signature today. The oceans are currently 30% more acidic than they were before your industrial impact, and the rate of change is accelerating beyond the capacity of marine life to adapt. As the water warms, it loses its ability to hold dissolved oxygen, leading to the expansion of vast, hypoxic dead zones where nothing but anaerobic bacteria can survive. In the deep time of the Great Dying, this process culminated in the stagnation of the global ocean currents, allowing green sulfur bacteria to thrive and release massive quantities of hydrogen sulfide gas. The atmosphere of the Permian eventually smelled of rotten eggs, a toxic haze that poisoned the land and stripped away the ozone layer. You are retracing these steps with forensic precision. The bleaching of the coral reefs and the collapse of the plankton populations are not isolated ecological tragedies. They're the early stages of an ocean-wide necrosis. You are turning the planetary heat sink into a planetary pressure cooker, and the chemical fallout will remain in the water for tens of thousands of years after your presence has been scrubbed from the surface. You must discard the delusion that the warming of the atmosphere is a tragedy for the Earth. To a planetary pathologist, global warming is not a problem to be solved. It is a fever. When a biological organism is invaded by a virulent pathogen, it raises its internal temperature to a level that is lethal to the invader but survivable for the host. This is a sterilization mechanism. The Earth is currently experiencing a planetary immune response designed to cook off the infection that is humanity. The planet has been much hotter than this in the past. During the Eocene epoch, 50 million years ago, there were no ice caps and palm trees grew in the Arctic. The Earth is perfectly comfortable in a hothouse state. Life flourished in those temperatures, but that life did not include you. You are a product of the Pleistocene, a biological anomaly that evolved during a rare and stable cooling trend in the Earth's history. Your entire physiology, your agricultural systems, and your infrastructure are calibrated for a narrow thermal window that is now closing forever. The planet is not in danger of dying. It is simply changing the locks so that you can no longer live here. By raising the temperature, the Earth is dismantling the specific environmental conditions that allowed your species to metastasize across the globe. The physics of your survival are brutal and non-negotiable. You are a mammal that regulates its internal temperature through the evaporation of sweat, a process that becomes physically impossible when the environment reaches the wet bulb temperature limit. When the ambient temperature exceeds 35 degrees Celsius at 100% humidity, the air can no longer absorb moisture from your skin. In these conditions, your internal heat cannot escape, and you begin to cook from the inside out. Your organs fail, your brain swells, and you die in a matter of hours, regardless of your health or access to water. As the planetary fever intensifies, vast swaths of the equatorial regions will reach these wet bulb thresholds, rendering them biologically uninhabitable for humans. You have built your megacities in the very zones that the planet is now preparing to sanitize. This is the mechanism of the purge. The Earth does not need to declare war on you. It only needs to wait for the laws of thermodynamics to do their work. As the heat rises, the complex social structures you call civilization will liquefy. Agriculture will collapse as the predictable rainfall patterns of the Holocene vanish, replaced by a chaotic cycle of mega droughts and catastrophic floods. You cannot negotiate with a fever, and you cannot transition to a sustainable version of a pathogen. The tipping points are already beginning to trigger, like a series of organ failures in a terminal patient. At 4 degrees Celsius of warming, the Amazon rainforest, the largest terrestrial carbon sink on the planet, will reach a point of total desiccation. It will cease to be a forest and will transform into a dry savanna, releasing billions of tons of stored carbon back into the atmosphere in a massive, feedback-driven explosion of gas. This is the point of no return. Once the Amazon turns, the planetary fever becomes self-sustaining, independent of any further human activity. The permafrost in the Arctic will thaw, releasing ancient reservoirs of methane that have been locked in the ice for millennia. This is the Earth taking the steering wheel out of your hands. You may talk of carbon credits and renewable energy, but these are merely the frantic prayers of an infection that realizes the immune system has finally noticed it. The planet is moving toward a new state of homeostasis, a hothouse equilibrium that has no room for a hyperpredator that consumes 75% of the available biomass. The fever will continue to rise until the irritant is neutralized. The end of your era will not be a cinematic explosion. It will be a slow, agonizing period of thermal exhaustion. You will watch as the monocultures of wheat and corn that feed your billions wither in the heat. You will watch as the oceans rise to reclaim the coastal nodes of your global trade network. You will fight over the remaining scraps of habitable land, accelerating your own demise through the very violence that defined your rise. But through it all, the planet will remain indifferent. The Earth has survived 5 mass extinctions before you, and it will survive the 6th. It has seen the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, the freezing of the oceans, and the fire of the Siberian traps. You are merely a brief, intense spike in the data, a momentary deviation from the mean. The fever is the cure, and the heat is the instrument of your removal. When the temperature finally stabilizes millions of years from now, the Earth will be a different world, populated by new forms of life that have evolved to thrive in the heat you created. But you will not be there to see it. You are the impact event, and the shockwave is finally catching up to you. The fever will break only when the silence of the fossil record begins again, marking the successful sterilization of the surface and the end of the human breach. The recovery of the planetary body began the moment the human metabolic rate slowed to a halt. 10 million years is a geological blink, a mere fraction of the time it took for the planet to recover from the Permian Extinction. Yet for the biosphere, it has been a period of total reformatting. Once the human pathogen was neutralized by the thermal spike and the subsequent collapse of its global supply chains, the Earth entered a phase of profound quietude. The massive, energy-dense structures of the Anthropocene did not stand as monuments. They acted as heat sinks and then as piles of structural debris. Without constant maintenance, the concrete rotted as water infiltrated the rebar, causing the steel to expand and shatter its stone casing from within. The glass of the skyscrapers returned to sand, and the sprawling suburban grids were overwritten by the aggressive expansion of pioneer species. In the initial vacuum, the survivors were not the specialists or the majestic megafauna you once admired, but the opportunistic generalists. Rats, cockroaches, and jellyfish became the new architects of the post-human world. They did not mourn your passing. They metabolized your remains. Over the course of 5 million years, these weedy species underwent a massive evolutionary radiation, filling the ecological voids left by the species you erased. The descendants of the common rat have radiated into 1,000 different forms, some filling the niches once occupied by wolves and bears, evolving into specialized predators with elongated limbs and complex social structures. The biosphere has no memory of the creatures you drove to extinction. It has not missed the white rhino, the blue whale, or the orangutan. It has replaced them with new, functional forms that are better adapted to the higher baseline temperatures and the altered atmospheric chemistry of the post-fever world. The Earth is once again a complex, self-regulating system, having successfully overwritten the human anomaly with a fresh layer of biological data that is entirely indifferent to your former presence. One of the most significant evolutionary hurdles of the post-human era was the sheer volume of synthetic polymers left behind by your industrial metabolism. For a few millennia, plastic was a persistent toxin, a non-biodegradable pollutant that clogged the digestive tracts of the early survivors and littered the ocean floors in vast, sterile blankets. However, life is an opportunistic chemical process that eventually finds a way to exploit any available source of carbon. In the deep time of the recovery, bacteria and fungi evolved the specific enzymes necessary to break down polyethylenes, polypropylenes, and polystyrenes. What you called trash became a new source of metabolic energy. Microbial mats now flourish on the remnants of your landfills, secreting acids that dissolve synthetic fibers and turning them into organic compounds. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch did not vanish into the void. It was digested and incorporated into the marine food web. The oceans have filtered themselves, and the synthetic molecules that once defined your industrial success have been broken down and recycled into the global carbon cycle. There is no permanent scar left on the surface of the planet to indicate that a global civilization once existed. The forests have reclaimed the ruins of your cities, and the persistent pressure of root systems has ground your monuments into a fine, nutrient-rich silt. To an observer from space, the Earth appears as it has for billions of years, a vibrant, swirling marble of green and blue, entirely scrubbed of the gray infection that once threatened to turn it into a sterile rock. If we descend into the stratigraphic record of the future, we find the true forensic legacy of your species. It is not found in books, digital archives, or the grand architecture you believed would last forever. Those artifacts disintegrated within centuries, their data lost to the entropy of decay. Instead, your entire history is found in a thin, anomalous layer of sediment that marks the boundary between the Holocene and the recovery period. A future geologist, perhaps an intelligent descendant of a corvid or a cephalopod, would look at this layer and see the unmistakable evidence of a brief, violent impact event. This is the technofossil layer, a razor-thin band of strange materials that do not occur naturally in any other geological epoch. They would find plastiglomerates, rocks formed from the fusion of volcanic basalt, sand, and the melted plastic of your ancient coastal cities. They would find a global layer of soot and microdiamonds, the carbonized remains of the forests you burned and the fossil fuels you exhaled into the atmosphere. But the most striking feature of this layer would be the chemical signature of your nuclear age. The atmospheric nuclear tests of the mid-20th century released isotopes like plutonium-239 and americium-241, which have settled into the soil worldwide. This is your golden spike, a permanent radioactive marker that will remain detectable in the rock record for hundreds of thousands of years. To the deep time of the Earth, you are not a culture or a civilization. You are a geochemical pulse, a momentary deviation in the isotopic composition of the crust. The most abundant fossil evidence of your existence will not be your own skeletons, which are fragile and prone to rapid decay. Instead, the index fossil of the Anthropocene will be the bones of the broiler chicken. Because you bred and slaughtered these birds by the billions, their genetically modified skeletons have been deposited in massive, concentrated layers within your landfills and waste pits. Future geologists will find billions of these identical, oversized avian remains, all showing the same markers of rapid growth and systemic bone density issues. This fossil record tells a story of a world that was temporarily converted into a factory for a single species, a period where biodiversity was sacrificed for the mass production of a single biological commodity. There is no dignity in this record. It does not speak of your philosophy, your music, or your art. It speaks of a biological system that became dangerously out of balance. Your smartphone, once the pinnacle of your personal identity and the vessel for your collective knowledge, will be reduced to a microscopic smudge of rare earth metals, neodymium, yttrium, and terbium, trapped in a layer of compressed mud. Your entire digital existence, your memories, and your social networks will be nothing more than a faint chemical anomaly in a bed of silt. You are leaving behind a legacy of junk and isotopes, a thin layer of debris that will be studied as a curiosity of natural history, much like the coprolites of dinosaurs or the ash of a volcanic eruption. The city of New York, once a hub of global commerce and human ego, will eventually be compressed into a layer of metamorphic rock no thicker than a human thumb. The steel of the skyscrapers will oxidize into iron oxide, staining the surrounding sandstone a deep, rusty red. The concrete will be crushed under the weight of accumulating sediment until it is indistinguishable from the limestone around it. This is the ultimate fate of all your achievements. The Earth does not preserve, it recycles. It takes the complex and reduces it to the fundamental. In the grand chronology of the planet, humanity will be classified as a combustion event. You will be grouped with the Siberian traps and the Chicxulub asteroid as a primary driver of extinction and environmental flux. You were a fire that burned exceptionally bright and exceptionally fast, consuming the available oxygen and fuel until you choked on your own exhaust. You were a momentary spike in the temperature graph, a brief deviation from the planetary mean that was corrected by the very laws of physics you thought you had transcended. The Earth has already processed the trauma of your arrival. It has neutralized the toxins, recycled the plastic, and buried your bones under kilometers of new, untainted rock. The recovery is complete, and the planet is once again a vibrant, chaotic, and self-regulating system that has no need for a master, a steward, or a savior. The fever has broken, and the infection has been purged. The forests that now cover the continents are not the managed parks of your era. They are wild, untamed, and lethal. The oceans are once again thick with life, from the microscopic plankton to the massive, multi-ton predators that have evolved to rule the depths. The air is clean, the carbon cycle is balanced, and the temperature has stabilized into a new, hothouse equilibrium that supports a diversity of life you could never have imagined. The Earth continues to spin through the void, a lush and living world that is completely and utterly unaware that you ever existed. Your history was a flicker of light in a dark room, a brief and frantic struggle for dominance that ended in a silent, geological grave. The room has now returned to its natural state. You were the asteroid, a violent and transformative force that cleared the way for something new. But the Earth is the survivor, and it has already moved on to the next chapter of its 4 billion-year story, a story in which you are nothing more than a thin layer of strange, toxic rock at the bottom of a very long cliff.